how many were here last week and we talked about quantum mechanics and so forth, and how our intentions and our thoughts actually can have impact on other people at distance with time and space? Well, we talked about quantum mechanics, which are how things are connected and defy Newtonian physics or friction motion and things like that. But beyond quantum is something called string theory. And string theory postulates that everything in the universe is made up of these tiny vibrating strings. And these strings are identical, but if they're identical, then why would one present as a heavy object like a proton and another an object without mass like a photon, a particle of light? And it has to do with the frequency or the vibration, in other words, the amount of energy in the string. Remember Einstein's equation? E equals mc squared. E is energy, equals the mass times the speed of light squared. So the more energy you have, the more mass you have. Okay? And so this is the idea that all these little tiny strings, now if you want to know how tiny they are, according to the theorist, if we had a silver dollar and we blew take the size of the silver dollar, and we blow that up, magnify it so it's the size of our solar system, you can get your mind around that, it's just huge, then a string would be the size of a tree. Okay? So a string is the size of it's really tiny, okay? And so all these things are supposedly connected in the entire universe with these infinitesimally small strings. Now, with all that in mind, I got an email this week from Mark Cox, because one of our online listeners used to come, and he's a pastor at one of the churches here in the region. And he reminded me of this quotation from Ellen White found in Evangelism, page 93. By the way, do you find the string theory too bizarre to believe in? It's like, that's too bizarre. Listen to this quote. The striking feature of divine operations is the accomplishment of the greatest work that can be done in our world by very simple means. It is God's plan that every part of his government shall depend on every other part, the whole as a wheel within a wheel, working with the entire harmony. He moves upon human forces, causing his spirit to touch invisible chords, and the vibration rings to the extremity of the universe. Didn't that just give you chills? Blow your mind? Okay, well, so what do you think about this idea now? That healing prayer could mobilize these chords, causing these vibrations over space and time, that if you have healing prayer with the intention of love and regard, that you can actually alter another person's DNA and they can experience healing. What do you think about that? Too bizarre? Well, an interesting study was done by Dr. McCready and colleagues, and they had individuals trained to focus their intention with love and goodwill. Their intention with a regard of love and goodwill. Then they took human DNA from placentas and they put them in test tubes, and they had them focus with love and goodwill their intention to have the DNA either become more tightly wound together or unwind and loosen up. And they could measure that with ultraviolet light, because the more tightly wound the DNA in the vial, it would absorb more light. And so it was very measurable to do that. Okay? As they focused their intention with love and goodwill, then they generated the emotions of love and goodwill, and they focused their intention on the DNA to wind or unwind. They could actually measure 25% change in the DNA conformation. In other words, the structure of the DNA changed by 25% based simply on their intent and goodwill. Now, what gets interesting is when the individuals would just generate the feelings of love and goodwill, but had no mental intention to change the DNA conformation, there was no change in DNA conformation. Further, when they had the intention to change the DNA, but their emotions were not set on love and goodwill, their emotions were set on frustration, irritation, anger, no DNA conformation. Now, how could they tell whether their emotions were this love and goodwill or whether their emotions were negative? By something called heart rate variability. You can actually measure a person's heart rate variability. When you have an emotion of love and goodwill, the heart becomes very rhythmic, and the variability between heart rate actually decreases. It becomes but when you're irritated, when you're angry, you get a lot of variability in your heart rate, and it's measurable. And so when they focused their intention with love and goodwill, the DNA conformation changed. But when they focused their intention with negative emotions, they couldn't get the DNA conformation change. Isn't this interesting? Well, you may think, okay, maybe that's just a general electromagnetic field effect. They're making that effect, so they said, let's do this study. Let's take 3 vials with the same concentration of human DNA in it, and let's have these individuals focus with love and goodwill on changing the DNA conformation more tightly wound in 2 of the vials, all set next to each other, but not the 3rd vial. Guess what? Light absorption changed in the 2 they focused on, but it didn't change in the 3rd one. Then they did 5 experiments, where in 5 different experiments, they took the vials with the DNA and had them taken a half a mile away. And they had the individuals focus on changing the DNA conformation with love and goodwill in their heart. And guess what? 25% change in DNA conformation was measured a half a mile away. This is quantum mechanics. This is string theory. This is entanglement stuff. It's really cool. Is it cool? Okay. Next, study done by Dr. Targ and their group, and I've got the references in the notes. If you want to go look up the original sources, you can do this. Conducted a study that measured the impact of long-distance remote prayer on individuals who were never met by the ones doing the prayer. These faith healers were brought in and asked to pray for the health and recovery of terminally ill AIDS patients. And the faith healers were presented with a photo, a name, and the T helper cell count of the person they were to pray for. The individuals in the study were randomized to either have one of these people, these faith healers, pray for them, or not. But it was very rigorously guarded, so no one knew which group they were assigned to. 6 months later, those who received the remote healing prayers showed not only improved mood, but significantly less doctor visits, less hospitalizations, less days in the hospital, higher T helper cell counts, fewer AIDS-defining illnesses, and significantly lower viral loads than those who were not being prayed for. Why? Putting the studies together, the theory is, in fact, that their prayers through these quantum entanglements, these string theories, with intention and goodwill, were causing DNA conformation changes on a host of genes that resulted in a myriad of various proteins that were health-promoting and viral-fighting to result. In another study, researchers placed cancer patients in a Faraday cage. A Faraday cage is a cage in which it's like copper wire mesh, which blocks all electromagnetic signals from entering the cage. And they even used fiber optics to run in to measure what they were going to measure. They were using fiber optic cables, so there was no wires running into the cable that EM could potentially go through. Then they had either a spouse or close friend focus with healing, intention, and love on the cancer patient. Now, this is where it gets bizarre. On 10-second intervals, randomly chosen by a computer. So a computer would say, okay, go, and for those 10 seconds, you would focus a healing intention on that person inside a Faraday cage. And they were measuring the electric conductivity of their skin, and randomly, every time those 10 seconds were going on, the electrical conductivity of their skin changed, indicating it was activating their autonomic nervous system. The point is we're all connected. And we are free will beings. And the quantum mechanics explain that our intentions, our free will choices, actually impact the world around us. It's quite profound. Our thoughts, our beliefs, our heartfelt intentions cause these things. Now, what do you think with all this about the Ellen White quote I read earlier? About the invisible strings vibrating. Isn't it profound? What about James? The prayer of a righteous man availeth much. Now, what makes a man righteous? Means that they have a right heart attitude. They're right in love with God. You see, righteous is not doing right rituals and having a selfish heart. Righteous is having a heart of love. And the prayer of a righteous man, a heart of love, and that's what the study shows. Only when your heart has love and good intent do you actually have these positive impacts on people.
Isn't that really had nothing to do with their religion?
In this particular case, it didn't, because many religions are not very helpful. It had to do with God is love, okay? And we see it most profoundly in Christ. Further, what do you think about now when you think about circumcision of the heart by the Spirit? Cutting away these strings, these belief and emotional attachments to destructive things, and establishing your heart's connections with godly things, things of love and altruism. Okay, isn't it profound? Yeah.
So how do you work with people then who prayed intentionally for somebody to be healed or approved, and they died.
How do you work with people along those lines? These didn't necessarily prevent death. It may have changed the outcome, but remember, even Jesus, when he healed people, he healed the woman with the issue of blood. He even raised Lazarus from the dead, but all of them still ended up dying. Didn't they? All the lepers, all the blind people, they all ended up dying. Why? Because we're still in a world in which we are slowly decaying. So we're seeing the effects, but we have to remember we're still in a world that isn't working as God designed it to work. Okay? Not only that, our individual prayers don't override the free will intention of the person being prayed for. And I didn't go into all the studies, but I can tell you, your own beliefs about what's happening to you are more powerful than the beliefs of another person's intentions for you.
So it almost sounds like if a person is, say, dying of cancer, and they want people to pray for them, and they believe in healing themselves, that they'll be healed if enough prayers are said. It almost sounds like if enough prayers are said...
Within limits. Because what's happening is, if you look at the microbiology, other than God working to perform a miracle and provide new, let's say, genetic information that's not in the body itself, for instance, let's say somebody with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, there's a missing gene, a broken gene. The genetic information to produce a certain protein is not in that person's body. All the prayer in the world, unless God himself, the creator, steps in and provides that genetic information, won't result. The studies that I'm telling you about, what's happening is your prayers are actually resulting in quantum connections which are causing in that person's body the activation of certain genes that they possess to produce proteins that are healing for them. But if you don't possess those genes, then the prayer isn't going to have the outcome.
Or if you continue to live outside the laws of health.
Or if you continue to live outside the laws of health. It doesn't violate your free will choice. Remember, these are free will choices. But it also, if you really start thinking about all this, it goes back to the purpose of prayer. And you look in Daniel chapter, I think it's 10, where he begins to pray for the king of Persia to let the people go. And the angel comes and he's fighting against the prince of Persia. Gabriel's fighting against the prince of Persia. What's all going on here? This is going on in the king of Persia's mind. And there's influences happening based on prayer.
This is in harmony with the design law.
It's all, exactly.
Designed all this to work this way, and it's not to be confused with we talk God into doing something we want him to do. Right. That's what some prayer chains worry me about that.
Yep.
We're trying to convince God to do the right thing. That's not the same thing.
Exactly.
It can devolve to paganism really quickly.
It could devolve into paganism.
More prayers, more appeasements, for more fervent prayers, more appeasement.
Or into self. We have power. We have the power. Right. We can get together and we can hold hands and we can do this in and of ourselves. Now, there are certain things we can do. We can do surgery. We can do massage. We can do lots of things that do have healing benefit, but they're all working inside the mechanisms of how God has constructed things. So even positive influence, we can have love and concern. Maybe you've seen that you've expressed love to somebody who was very troubled and you saw the healing impact of them being accepted and loved. Okay? And that can happen even if a person doesn't believe in God. Why? Because it's inside God's design. It's how he has designed things to do. But it's much more effective when we connect with the source. Much more effective. Yes?
When we take it to where Brian and Russell were speaking about, we then put ourselves over God.
Yep. All righty, so let's move on to the lesson.